I'm out here in the orchard finishing the last row of thinning, and I ran into, this whole time I've been running into a whole bunch of DC bureaucrats, and I just wanted to show you what it looked like in an orchard. And some trees are really bad, others are not, but here's a decent example. This isn't too bad of an example. You see this right here? I mean, I got lots of fruit, producing really well, this tree. It's beautiful. You know, the orchard is just doing so good. And it's been, you know, we've been working on thinning these things because we do them all by hand. So it's been, you know, almost, 3 weeks? And we're on the last couple trees. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And many times I've run into this, and I thought about this you know, comparison here. It's much like the government, because here we got a beautiful tree that we call, you know, the United States of America, our land, and it's at one time producing a whole lot of really good fruit. But what's happening now is our government is becoming so heavy, and this branch that is producing lots of apples. Hey, Elias, let me talk here, okay? You can't hear while you're doing that. This branch right here, if we don't thin it, these are the bureaucrats. These are the DC bureaucrats here. They're mixed in with, you know, good fruit and good purpose. But it's so heavy that eventually, if we don't thin it, it will break this branch. And then you lose all the fruit. And then it also, the tree becomes susceptible to diseases and so forth because you got a broken branch. And so even though it's hard, you have to thin it. You have to get rid of almost all of this fruit to save the branch. And so that the tree is healthy. And then also what happens, very interesting. And so it's kind of sad because you look at this, I mean, you got to take off this nice little apple here and throw it on the ground because for the sake of the branch and for the sake of the fruit, because these will grow and keep growing. They won't stop growing, and they'll just get to where they're so big, and that branch will break off, and then it'll ruin all the fruit. And so it's exactly what we have to do in DC and in our states. The bureaucrats will never stop growing. They'll never stop, and they'll break the branch, which is all the good things that we get to enjoy. And man, it's hard to thin these things because you're like, oh man, they're just good fruit. But if you don't, it will kill the tree, or it will kill the branch, and it will make it so that the fruit is all deformed, and so it doesn't grow as big. And so that's what you have to do, and that's exactly what we're going to have to do, or we will break the branch. Now, the thing about it is I don't think the bureaucrats are going to let us do it. I don't think they're going to, I think they're going to defend themselves and never allow the people to thin them. Like, here's a nice big, you know, apple. It's growing good, but it's among these other fruit, and if you don't thin them, then it will either deform the other fruit or make them smaller where they can't produce, they won't produce as good, or it'll break a branch. There's also a bunch of little fruit that's just little and not doing anything. There's a whole bunch of that, and you just get rid of those because they're just there, just sucking nutrition off the tree, and they're never going to turn into and they're not really going to producing anything. So anyway, it's, I think, a good analogy of, you know, our government. And I don't know if we're too past the point where they're just going to take down the whole tree because they're not going to allow themselves to be thinned, and the people are too weak to thin them, and so they protect themselves against us, and they just keep growing and growing and growing and breaking branches and sucking nutrition until the tree and branches are dead. See, this is a hard decision right here. You know, you think, oh, should I leave it? You know, it's a beautiful, but they're all bunched together. So I end up pulling this one off, because then those other two apples will grow healthy and that branch will be a lot healthier. Here's another little example. It's just, if you don't, this branch right here will break. If you don't thin this off, it'll come down and break when the wind blows and when this fruit gets big. And so I think I've made my point here, you know, but it's happening in our states. You know, Idaho's a pretty small state, but you know, we've got just tons of bureaucracy going on, and we got more law enforcement per person in Idaho than states like Illinois. And yet, you know, we're not a crime state, and you know, so what do they got to do? They got to go out and they got to start giving people a bunch of tickets, and they got to make sure that they arrest people at the Capitol. They got to do all these things. They got to justify their existence. Here's a really good example. You see this branch right here? And you see how it's starting to bow? Now, some of these, not very many, but I saw one earlier on this row, because this is the last one where a branch was already broken. And so if you do not thin that right there, heavily thin it, that branch will break. And if you don't thin it and the branch doesn't break, which it will for sure, but some branches, then that fruit will always be small and be deformed. It'll never come to its full potential. And so let's thin this thing out, even though it's hard to get rid of all this fruit and just drop it on the ground. And it's hard for bureaucrats to go find new jobs and to find new, you know, ways to make a living for their family. But it's necessary for our future. And DC and the state's bureaucrats must allow the people to thin them down, or they will destroy us. That's a lot of fruit I had to take off that. Look at that. But now that should sustain that fruit. Maybe get a little bit more off of them. Probably one right here, one right here. And anyway, hopefully that makes sense. And I don't know what we do about it, because if we even talk about limiting government, then we're anti-government and they come after us. We're just like they've done with me and many others. So, all right, I hope you have a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day here, and you know, feel very blessed to be living here and to be able to communicate with you and try to do all we can to save our country and save our land, and mostly preserve our liberties. So have a beautiful day.